On a Wednesday afternoon in May, Governor Siminalayi Fubara stood outside a newly commissioned hospital in Rumwigbo, Port Harcourt, and did something governors rarely have to do in the middle of a routine project inspection. He looked into the cameras and denied, on the record, that he had left his own political party. He walked into that hospital tour to talk about beds and healthcare access. He walked out having to explain who he was. Because 6 days later, he would walk into the APC's Rivers State screening venue carrying nomination forms for a second term as governor. And in a matter of days, he would walk out without them, the forms withdrawn, the ticket gone to another man entirely. What he says happened next and what the structure around him suggests may actually be happening are not quite the same story. Most channels gave you the headline, "Fubara denies defection and moved on." We stay until we find the architecture underneath it. If you have never been here before, you just found the channel that tells you what the headline was designed to hide. Subscribe, because what comes next is the part neither camp in this Rivers standoff is hoping you connect. The difference between what a governor is legally required to tell you and what he is legally required to do. Here is the sequence in order. In early May, Rivers State's APC screening committee began disqualifying legislative aspirants ahead of the 2027 cycle, a process that would eventually knock out 58 of 65 House of Assembly hopefuls. Reports at the time noted a pattern in who survived and who didn't. Aspirants aligned with Fubara were disproportionately represented among the disqualified, while those aligned with his predecessor and former godfather, Nyesom Wike, largely cleared. That pattern is what the disqualified aspirants themselves cited when word emerged that some were considering their options outside the party. Around the same period, Governor's brother Blessing Fubara obtained a governorship nomination form for the Nigeria Democratic Congress, the NDC. That single, verifiable fact is what lit the speculation, not a statement from the governor, a form filed by a relative at a moment when his own loyalists were being pushed out of APC primaries. By Wednesday, May 13th, the speculation had grown loud enough that Fubara addressed it directly. Touring the newly built General Hospital in Rumwigbo, he told reporters the rumors were the product of a lot of drama in the media and social media misinterpretation. His words, "I'm a member of the All Progressive Congress and nothing has changed." He asked the public to verify information before spreading it. That should have settled it. It did not. On Tuesday, May 19th, Fubara withdrew from the APC governorship primary altogether, a race he had already passed screening for. He framed the exit as sacrifice, not surrender, a decision made, in his words, for the sake of Rivers State's peace and unity, not out of weakness or fear. 2 days later, Thursday, May 21st, the APC held its primary without him. The party's screening committee chairman, Bitrus Kwamoti, announced the winner, Kingsley Chinda, a lawmaker from the Aquaria bloc widely understood to sit inside Wike's camp. The governor who denied leaving his party no longer held that party's ticket to lead his own state. That is the sequence through May 21st. By May 25th, the men around Fubara had already started arguing publicly about what it meant. We come to what Wike said about that withdrawal and what it revealed about a deal nobody had confirmed until then, in a moment. Why did this unfold now, specifically, rather than at any other point in Fubara's term? The answer sits in the electoral calendar. APC's national screening and primary exercises for the 2027 cycle were running through May 2026, the exact window in which every state party structure locks in its candidate slate for governorship and legislative seats. For Wike's camp, securing Chinda as the APC governorship candidate in that window meant securing control of the party's Rivers State structure a full year and a half before the actual election. For Fubara, remaining publicly inside APC while his internal position eroded meant preserving optionality without triggering any of the legal exposure that comes with an open break. That calculation may prove shrewder than it first looks, because Nigerian law treats what he did very differently than it would a lawmaker doing the same thing. This is not the first time a Nigerian governor has managed this exact maneuver. In January 2026, Kano State Governor Abba Kabir Yusuf resigned his membership from the NNPP amid an escalating rift with his own political godfather, Senator Rabiu Kwankwaso, and kept his office without incident because the Constitution simply does not touch governors the way it touches state lawmakers. The same pattern shows up further back. Ebonyi State's David Umahi, Cross River State's Benayade, and Zamfara State's Bello Matawale each crossed from PDP to APC mid-term with 0 seat forfeiture. And Delta State's Sheriff Oborevori did the same in April 2025 when he crossed from the PDP to the APC. But what I just laid out is still the version built entirely on inference, a brother's form, a disqualification pattern, a withdrawal speech. What is actually knowable and what is simply assumed to be true because it fits the shape of a familiar Nigerian political story are two different things. Let's look at exactly what the evidence supports and where it stops.
Here is the claim, stated plainly by the man at the center of it. Fubara says he remains a card-carrying member of the APC, that he has not gone anywhere, and that reports suggesting otherwise are misinformation. Here is what the documented record actually shows set beside that claim. Fubara passed APC screening for a second term. He then withdrew from the primary before it was held. The primary proceeded without him, and the party's ticket for Rivers State Governor now belongs to Kingsley Chinda. Separately and simultaneously, the governor's brother holds an active nomination form with a different registered party, and a majority of assembly aspirants aligned with the governor were disqualified from APC's own legislative primaries, a result they are actively appealing. The gap is this: none of those facts contradict Fubara's statement. He can be telling the exact truth about his membership status in this moment and still be standing at the edge of a defection everyone around him is already positioning for. Nothing has changed is a claim about the present tense. It is not and cannot be a binding claim about the future. Read that phrase again slowly. Nothing has changed. Under Nigerian law, that sentence is nearly costless for a governor to say, because the moment it stops being true, there is no constitutional penalty waiting for him. This is the legal standard that matters here, and it is frequently misunderstood even by people covering this story. Sections 68(1)(g) and 109(1)(g) of the 1999 Constitution require a lawmaker, a senator, a House of Representatives member, a state assembly member, to vacate their seat if they defect from the party that sponsored their election, unless the division stems from a genuine division within that party. Nigerian courts, including the Supreme Court in the Abegunde case, have interpreted that division exception narrowly, but those sections apply only to legislators. The Constitution is silent on governors, deputy governors, the president, and the vice president. Legal scholarship on this gap is blunt about the consequence. An executive office holder can defect mid-term and face no forfeiture of office whatsoever. That is why observers who watched Fubara's denial treated it with open skepticism rather than relief. Coverage of the story at the time noted that the defection rumor had already attracted some jubilation, with some political figures reportedly signaling they would welcome him on a new platform. People reading the same public record we just walked through arrived at the same gap independently. If what I just laid out changes how you see this story, drop a comment right now. I want to know where you stood before this video, because what comes next is going to change it again. Assume for a moment that every actor here is behaving with full strategic intent. What does the current arrangement actually do simultaneously for each of them? For Fubara, staying publicly inside APC while declining to contest its primary does three things at once. It removes him from a primary fight he might have lost badly to a weaker-backed structure. It preserves his legal position, since nothing he has said or done yet constitutes a defection with consequence. And it keeps a door open through his brother's active NDC nomination, without the governor personally having to walk through it. For Wike and the Chinda camp, Fubara's withdrawal does something different but equally strategic. It hands the APC governorship line in Rivers without the risk of an intra-party primary that could have exposed real cracks in their support. It lets Wike publicly frame Fubara's exit as capitulation rather than negotiation, which is precisely the language Wike used when he broke his silence on Monday, May 25th, mocking the withdrawal and revealing what he described as a Tinubu-brokered understanding, that Fubara had agreed to abandon a second term in exchange for the assembly dropping its impeachment threats against him. Wike called the governor's decision to collect nomination forms in the first place a failure of what he termed gentlemanliness. And it sets up the next phase procedurally, a 2027 general election in which the APC line in Rivers is now settled and Wike aligned, while Fubara's actual electoral path, inside APC, through the NDC or elsewhere, remains officially undeclared. APC's national chairman, Nentawe Yilwata, offered the party's counter-framing the same day on Channels Television. He insisted Fubara's withdrawal was entirely personal, that the governor bought forms, passed screening, and simply chose to step aside before the vote, and pushed back hard on the idea that Wike had engineered the outcome at all, pointing out that Wike is formally a PDP member, not an APC one. That leaves Fubara fighting on several fronts simultaneously, not one. First, an internal structural front, where his own loyalists were disqualified from the legislative primaries and are now appealing that outcome inside a party he no longer controls. Second, a public narrative front, where Wike's version of events, a broken gentleman's agreement, is competing directly with Fubara's version of sacrifice for unity. Third, a credibility front, where every fresh denial has to be measured against a brother's nomination form that hasn't gone away. Everything I just told you about the political calculation assumes one thing is true, that Fubara's ultimate goal is to eventually contest for governor again under whichever banner gets him there. I want to test that assumption now because the alternative, that he is genuinely stepping back from ambition, as he claims, is not something the public record can rule out.
Zoom out from Fubara, Wike, and Rivers State specifically, and this incident sits inside a much bigger structural pattern in Nigerian democracy, the near-total absence of consequence for executive party switching. Nigeria's constitution was written to punish legislative disloyalty and simply forgot or declined to write the same rule for governors. The result, documented across Kano, Ebonyi, Cross River, Zamfara, Delta, and now Rivers, is a governing class that can promise voters one-party affiliation at the ballot box and change it entirely mid-term without ever facing a by-election, a recall, or a legal challenge that sticks. This is not a Rivers problem. It is a Nigerian federalism problem, and Rivers State is simply demonstrating it in public on a compressed timeline ahead of the country's most closely watched election cycle in years. For the diaspora audience following this channel, the relevance goes beyond domestic news cycles. International observers, election monitoring bodies, and diaspora political networks who track Nigeria's 2027 realignment, the ADC coalition talks, the NDC's own emerging role, the PDP's fragmentation, use stories like this one as a live test case for how governing party discipline actually holds up under pressure. A governor's denial that turns out to be technically true but strategically hollow is exactly the kind of data point that shapes how seriously outside observers take Nigeria's institutional guardrails ahead of the vote. Now, the strongest case for the other reading of this story, the one where Fubara is simply telling the truth. If Fubara genuinely intends to remain in APC, then everything built into this video, the brothers' form, the disqualification pattern, the timing, is circumstantial, not evidentiary. Political aspirants withdraw from primaries they believe they'll lose badly. That is not automatically evidence of a secret defection plan. It can simply be sound political math. A governor prioritizing state stability over a bruising, possibly unwinnable primary fight is a defensible decision on its own terms, and Fubara has said exactly that repeatedly and consistently since May 13th. It is also worth acknowledging directly, a relative's political activity is not the governor's own. Blessing Fubara obtaining a NDC form says something about one man's ambitions, not necessarily his brother's. Treating a family member's paperwork as proof of the governor's future intentions risks exactly the kind of evidentiary sloppiness this channel exists to push back against in other people's coverage. Here is the data point that complicates the clean defection is coming narrative. Nigerian political media has a long, mixed track record of predicting imminent gubernatorial defections based on circumstantial build-up, family ties, disqualification patterns, symbolic gestures that then simply do not materialize for months or ever. Speculation is not a forecast. It has failed to become one before, repeatedly in this exact political environment. The real battle is in the next few months as APC finalizes its full 2027 ticket posture and Fubara decides, or is forced to decide, whether to contest under any banner at all. I do not know yet which way this goes. From here, three paths sit in front of Fubara, each grounded in something concrete rather than speculation. Path 1. He stays inside APC through 2027, accepts Chinda's candidacy publicly, and works to rebuild internal standing while banking on continued goodwill from President Tinubu, who has personally intervened in Rivers' political crisis multiple times already. Path 2. He formally exits to the NDC or another platform closer to the election cycle, timed to minimize both political and legal exposure using the infrastructure his brother has already built as a landing point. The path that ends his political relevance in Rivers: prolonged limbo, neither committing to APC nor moving to a rival platform, while Wike's structure fully consolidates the APC machinery in the state and Fubara's own disqualified loyalists drift to other parties without him, leaving him a governor without a governing coalition behind his own name.
3 signals to watch over the coming months. First, whether blessing Fubara's NDC nomination proceed toward an actual candidacy. If it does, and the governor does not publicly and specifically repudiate it, that is a structural signal that outweighs any verbal denial. Second, what happens to the 58 disqualified assembly aspirants' appeals? If a significant number formally leave APC rather than wait out the appeal process, that is the clearest possible tell about where his loyalist base believes this is heading. Third, whether President Tinubu intervenes in Rivers again directly, as he has done repeatedly since the 2025 emergency rule. A fresh presidential intervention would mean the people closest to this situation see real defection risk, not just a media rumor. At the beginning of this video, I told you that Fubara walked into a hospital tour to talk about healthcare and walked out having to deny he'd left his own party. Days later, he walked into APC's screening process carrying nomination forms and walked out without them. The deeper truth sitting underneath both of those moments is this: in Nigeria, a governor's word about his party loyalty and a governor's legal obligation to that party are two completely separate things, held together by nothing but political convenience. Fubara has not lied about his membership. He also has not promised anything about his future, because the Constitution never made him. Watch this specific falsifiable marker over the coming months. Whether blessing Fubara's NDC candidacy formally advances without public repudiation from the governor. That single development will tell you more than any further denial will. What this means for Rivers State and for every other Nigerian state watching its own governor manage the run-up to 2027 is simple. The public is being asked to evaluate loyalty using a legal framework that was never built to test it. You now know something that most Nigerians watching the news tonight will never be told, that the governor's denial and the governor's options are not in conflict because the law lets them coexist. If this changed how you read the next Fubara headline, share it with someone who's still taking the denial at face value. That's how accountability actually spreads in this country, not by algorithm, by argument. Niger Unmasked. Nothing stays hidden here. I will get you in the next one.